A simple act of kindness in a small diner changed a billionaire's life, and the life of everyone he loved forever. The diner was not the kind of place where people expected to see a man like him. He usually spent his time in glass towers, offices, in luxury restaurants where every plate was spotless, and every server wore designer uniforms. But on that day, he wanted something different. His son had asked him if they could eat somewhere normal, a place where families came in jeans and sneakers, where the smell of coffee filled the air, and where pancakes were served on heavy plates with scratches from years of use. He agreed, mostly because his son rarely asked for anything at all, and when he did, it felt wrong to say no. He pulled his expensive car into the small parking lot, a sharp contrast against the line of rusty old trucks and family vans. His driver opened the door, and he stepped out in a tailored suit that looked entirely out of place. His son was next in his wheelchair, his frail arms resting on the handles as the driver carefully rolled him toward the entrance. People turned to look, some recognizing the man instantly, others only noticing the shine of wealth that seemed to follow him like a shadow. But the boy didn't notice the stares. He was smiling, excited in a way his father hadn't seen in a long time. Inside, the diner was buzzing with life. Plates clattered, children laughed, and the smell of bacon mixed with maple syrup made the boy's eyes light up. His father asked for a quiet corner booth, though none of the booths were truly private. They settled in, the boy resting his chin on the table as he looked around. His father scrolled through his phone, answering urgent messages, even though he had promised himself he would spend this meal focusing on his son. It was difficult to break habits built over years of running businesses worth billions. When the waitress walked over, she didn't seem fazed by who he was. Maybe she didn't recognize him. Maybe she simply didn't care. Her smile was warm, not the polite, practiced smile he was used to receiving. She greeted his son first, asking him what he wanted to eat, making him feel like the most important person at the table. The boy giggled and ordered pancakes with strawberries, his favorite. She didn't look at the billionaire father until after she had taken the boy's order, and that small detail struck him more than he expected. The food arrived quickly, but there was one problem. The boy wanted to sit in the booth like everyone else, not stay in his wheelchair. His father hesitated. He wasn't sure how to move his son without help. Usually, there were trained nurses or assistants nearby, people who knew how to lift the boy safely. But this time, there was no one. He froze, unsure what to do. The boy's hopeful eyes made his chest tighten, but before he could react, the waitress stepped forward. "Would you like me to help him?" she asked gently. The billionaire opened his mouth to refuse. His son was fragile, and strangers never touched him. But then he saw the way she looked at the boy, not with pity, not with fear, but with genuine care. His son nodded eagerly, trusting her instantly. The father's instincts screamed to stop her, but something inside told him to let it happen. She leaned down, speaking softly to the boy, asking if he was comfortable, if he was ready. He nodded again. With surprising strength for her small frame, she lifted him carefully, holding him as though he were her own little brother. The boy laughed, a real laugh, as she placed him gently on the booth seat. He beamed, thrilled to be sitting like everyone else in the diner. The billionaire sat frozen, his phone forgotten on the table. He watched his son smiling, his small hands clapping with joy, and he realized how long it had been since he had seen that kind of happiness on his face. All the money in the world hadn't given his boy this simple moment of joy. It was a waitress in a worn-out uniform, carrying his son with care, who managed to do what he had failed to provide. Throughout the meal, the waitress kept checking on them, not in an intrusive way, but with a kind of attentiveness that felt natural. She made sure the boy had extra syrup, cut his pancakes into small pieces so he could manage them himself, and even brought him a paper hat folded from the kids' menu. The boy wore it proudly, laughing every time it slipped sideways on his head. His father couldn't stop watching. He noticed how his son's eyes sparkled when she leaned down to talk to him, how his laughter filled the small diner and made other customers glance over with smiles of their own. The billionaire, a man who had closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, found himself at a loss for words. He couldn't remember the last time someone had touched his heart in such a simple, unplanned way. He looked at the waitress closely now. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her face. Her shoes looked worn, her hands rough from constant work, but her smile never faded. She carried trays, took orders, and joked with other customers. But she always returned to check on his son, as if he were the only child in the world. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt invisible and strangely. He liked it. People always saw his money first, his power second, and his face third. But here in this small diner, someone saw his son. Not the billionaire's child, not a boy defined by his disability, but just a kid who wanted pancakes and laughter. When the meal ended, the boy didn't want to leave. He begged to stay longer, to order another plate, to hear another joke from the waitress. His father promised they would come back soon, though he wasn't sure why he said it. He rarely made promises he wasn't absolutely certain he could keep. But in that moment, looking at his son's glowing face, he meant every word. As they prepared to go, the waitress returned to help lift the boy back into his wheelchair. She did it with the same gentleness as before, whispering encouragement into his ear, making him giggle again. The billionaire thanked her, though his words felt too small for what she had done. She just smiled, shrugged, and said it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. As they rolled out of the diner, the father glanced back through the window. He saw her laughing with another table, balancing plates with practiced ease. Moving quickly to keep up with the endless demands of her job, she was just a waitress in a small-town diner. Yet she had given his son more joy in one meal than he had seen in months. In the car, his son couldn't stop talking. He described the pancakes, the paper hat, the way she made him feel like a normal kid. His excitement filled the air, and the billionaire found himself listening quietly, his chest tight with emotions he didn't usually allow himself to feel. He realized something important on that drive home. No matter how much wealth he had, there were things money could never buy. That night, long after his son had fallen asleep, the billionaire sat alone in his study. He thought about the waitress, the way she had carried his boy without hesitation. The warmth in her voice, the smile that never wavered even though she looked exhausted. He thought about how strangers rarely touched his son, but she had done it naturally, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He couldn't explain why it affected him so deeply, but he knew one thing for certain. This encounter wasn't something he could just forget. It had been an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary diner. But for him and his son, it had changed everything. The kindness of one young woman had opened a door in his heart he thought had been closed forever. And as he replayed the moment in his mind, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The billionaire could not shake the memory of that day in the diner. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his son laughing, his tiny hands clapping in excitement, and the waitress bending down with a smile, as if nothing in the world mattered more than making the boy feel happy. It had been such a simple thing, yet it touched him in a way nothing else had for years. He had been around people who wanted to impress him, people who calculated every word when they spoke to him, people who smiled only because of his money. But this woman had been different. She had not cared about him. She had cared about his son. For several days he kept thinking about it. At first, he told himself it was silly. He was a busy man with companies to run, meetings to attend, contracts to sign. Why should he waste time thinking about a waitress? Yet, the thought came back again and again, especially when his son asked if they could go back. The boy didn't often ask to go anywhere. Most outings ended with him tired or sad, but the diner had been different. It had given him joy. And secretly, the father wanted to see the waitress again too. So one afternoon, without saying much, he instructed his driver to take him back to the same diner. This time, he went alone. His son was at a therapy session, and he didn't want to raise suspicion by making it look like a planned visit. He told himself he only wanted to see if what he remembered was real, if the waitress really was as kind as he thought, or if it had just been his imagination. When he walked in, the bell above the door jingled, and the smell of coffee and fried food filled the air. The diner was busy again, just as before. Families sat in booths, workers in dusty boots grabbed quick lunches, and teenagers laughed over milkshakes. It was so different from the places he usually went. Yet it felt more alive than the five-star restaurants where everything was perfect but cold. He sat at a booth in the corner, pulling out a newspaper to hide behind. He wanted to observe without being noticed. And there she was. The same waitress, her hair pulled back, her apron slightly stained from the rush of orders, moving quickly between tables. She carried plates on her arms like she had been doing it for years, balancing everything with ease. But it wasn't her skill that caught his attention. It was her attitude. He watched her laugh with an elderly couple who seemed to come often. She remembered their names, what they liked to drink, even how the man always asked for his eggs extra crispy. She bent down to listen to a little girl describing her new puppy and clapped, her hands like it was the best news she had heard all day. She didn't just take orders, she connected with people. Every single customer, no matter how small or ordinary, received a piece of her attention that felt genuine. He realized then that his son had not been special in her eyes because of who he was. She treated everyone like that, but somehow that made her kindness even more remarkable. He stayed longer than he planned, sipping coffee he didn't even like just so he could keep watching. When she came to his table, she didn't recognize him at first. She greeted him the same way she greeted everyone else, with that open smile and cheerful voice. He ordered something simple, just toast and coffee, and she nodded without question. Only later did he notice her glance linger on his face. Maybe she remembered the boy in the wheelchair, but she didn't mention it. She simply went about her work, as if he were just another customer. After she left, he listened to the conversations around him. It didn't take long to learn pieces of her life. One of the cooks in the back shouted something about her night classes, and another waitress teased her about being tired all the time. She laughed it off, saying she had to study if she wanted a better future. Then an older man at the counter asked how her little ones were doing, and she answered that her younger siblings were fine, that her sister had done well on a math test, and her brother was learning to play the guitar. The billionaire frowned into his coffee. Younger siblings? So she wasn't just working for herself, she was taking care of them too. He listened more carefully after that, piecing together small clues. Her parents were gone. He wasn't sure how, but the way she spoke made it clear she had been left with responsibility most people her age would never carry. She worked double shifts to pay the bills, went to night school to keep her dreams alive, and still found time to care about strangers in a diner. For a man who had spent most of his life surrounded by luxury, it was almost unbelievable. He had assistants, drivers, maids, chef's people who took care of every detail of his life. She had none of that, and yet she carried herself with more strength and grace than most people he knew in his world as he watched. He felt something unexpected stir inside him, guilt. He had everything anyone could want, but he rarely appreciated it. He had a son who needed him, yet he often hid behind his busy schedule, letting nannies and staff handle the hard parts. Meanwhile, this young woman was fighting every day for her siblings, refusing to give up even when life kept throwing obstacles at her. When she came back to refill his coffee, he found himself asking questions without thinking. "How long have you worked here?" She smiled and said, "Since high school. It pays the bills." He asked if she ever got tired. She laughed. "Every day, but it's worth it." He wanted to ask more. But she was called to another table, and just like that, she was gone again. Moving swiftly across the diner, he stayed until the place grew quieter, watching her pick up empty plates, sweep crumbs off the tables, and still keep that same smile. It was almost as if she had decided long ago not to let hardship steal her kindness. On the way out, he paused by the counter where she was ringing up another customer. For a moment he thought of giving her money, a big tip, maybe even enough to make a difference. But something stopped him. He realized that if he offered her money, she might think that was all he saw in hers, someone who needed saving. But he didn't want to see her as a charity case. He wanted to see her exactly as she was, strong, independent, and genuine. So he left quietly, giving only a normal tip, nothing unusual. Yet as he stepped into his car, he knew he would come back again. He wanted to know more, not because of curiosity alone, but because he felt drawn to her. There was something about her spirit that made him think about his own life, his own choices, and the kind of father he wanted to be. That night, his son asked if they could go back together next time. The boy remembered the waitress's jokes, her smile, and the way she had treated him like a regular kid. The billionaire nodded, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He promised they would go again soon. Lying in bed later, he thought about everything he had seen. The waitress had no idea that one of the richest men in the country had spent hours just watching her work. She didn't know he had learned about her struggles, her sacrifices, her strength. But he knew. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized he wanted to see how far her kindness went. And maybe, just maybe, he wanted to find a way to help her without taking away the dignity that made her so remarkable. It was just the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. But he felt certain of one thing. That waitress, with her tired hands and her endless smile, was about to change his life in ways he never expected. The boy kept asking about the diner. Every morning he would bring it up. Sometimes when his father was still sipping his coffee, sometimes when he was being tucked into bed at night. He wanted to go back, to see the nice lady, as he called her. He remembered the paper hat, the way she had cut his pancakes so he could eat on his own, as most of all, the way she had carried him without making him feel weak. To him, that single afternoon had been special. His father noticed how much brighter his son had become since that day. There was a new energy in his voice, more laughter in his eyes. The billionaire was not used to his son asking for things so eagerly. Most of the time, the boy accepted whatever routine was set for him: therapy sessions, doctor visits, tutors. But now, he was determined. He wanted pancakes again, and he wanted to see the waitress. So the father agreed. He told himself it was only for his son's happiness. But deep down, he knew he was also curious. When they arrived, the boy's face lit up the moment they walked through the door. The waitress spotted them instantly and came rushing over, her smile wide and genuine. She knelt down beside the boy's wheelchair, greeting him first, just as she had before. She didn't look at him as if he was fragile. She didn't pity him. She spoke to him like he was any other child. The boy laughed, his small hands waving excitedly as he told her he wanted pancakes again, with even more strawberries this time. She laughed with him, promising she would make sure the kitchen got it right. The father sat back, watching the exchange quietly. He was used to people focusing on him first, speaking to him with caution or respect. But here, she gave her attention to his son, and he didn't mind. In fact, it warmed something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time, as the meal went on. The waitress made little stops at their table, talking to the boy, asking him about his favorite shows, about the games he liked to play, about whether he had made any new friends. The boy answered eagerly, and for the first time in months he seemed like a child without burdens. She didn't treat him like a patient. She treated him like a friend. The billionaire found himself speaking to, though he hadn't planned to. When she asked about the boy's school, he explained the challenges, the therapies, the struggles they faced. He surprised himself by how much he shared. Normally, he avoided talking about personal matters with strangers, but with her, it felt natural. She listened carefully, nodding, her eyes soft with understanding. There was no judgment, no forced sympathy, only genuine concern. At one point, she admitted something about herself. She told them she often worried about failing her younger siblings, that sometimes she felt she wasn't enough for them. She explained how she worked extra hours to pay for their school supplies, how she studied late into the night because she wanted to build a better future, how she wished she could give them more. Her voice trembled slightly, but she smiled through it, as if to show she wasn't giving up. The boy looked at her seriously and said, "You're already enough." His innocent words made her eyes glisten. She bent down, kissed the boy gently on the forehead, and whispered a thank you. The father watched, moved in a way he couldn't describe. His son, who usually struggled to connect with people, had built a bond with her so quickly. It felt almost magical. The more time they spent at the diner, the more the friendship grew. They began going there often, sometimes for breakfast, sometimes for lunch. Each time, the waitress seemed genuinely happy to see them. The boy would wave as soon as they entered, and she would rush over with the same bright smile. She started remembering his little preferences: syrup, no butter, more strawberries. She even brought him small surprises, like a balloon one day, or a puzzle she had found at a thrift shop. For the billionaire, these visits became something unexpected. He had gone there at first to please his son, then out of curiosity, but soon he found himself looking forward to them as well. He realized he was more relaxed at the diner than he had been in years. The stress of his business life faded when he was there, replaced by simple conversations and genuine laughter. He even began leaving his phone in his pocket, ignoring the constant flood of emails and calls. One afternoon, after a long meal, the waitress sat down with them during her short break. She asked the boy about his favorite dream, what he wished he could do if he could do anything in the world. The boy thought for a long time and finally said he wanted to run in a park, to chase a ball like other kids did. The words broke the father's heart, but the waitress smiled gently and told him, "You may not run, but you can still chase happiness in your own way. And I'll bet you can find something even better than running." The boy nodded, believing her, comforted by her words. The father realized then that she was giving his son something priceless: hope. Not the false kind, not empty promises, but real hope, born out of kindness and encouragement. His son seemed stronger after every visit, not physically but emotionally. He laughed more. He smiled more. He spoke about dreams again. Slowly, the father also began opening up more to her. He told her about his struggles as a single parent, about the loneliness that wealth could never fill, about the guilt he carried for not always being there for his son. He was shocked at himself for admitting these things. But she listened without interruption, her eyes showing only understanding. She didn't treat him like a billionaire. She treated him like a man, a father, someone who was trying his best, but was often lost. She, in turn, shared more about her own fears. She spoke of nights when she cried quietly after her siblings went to bed, worrying that she wouldn't be able to pay the bills, worrying that she might never finish school, worrying that she would disappoint the two people who depended on her most. She spoke honestly, without pride or shame, and the billionaire admired her courage. The friendship grew naturally, without either of them planning it. There was no calculation, no hidden motive. It was simply two people from completely different worlds, finding comfort in each other's honesty. And at the center of it all was the boy, who had brought them together with his innocent wish for pancakes and kindness. One evening, after they had left the diner, the boy looked at his father and said, "She makes me feel normal." The words cut deep, but they also brought relief. His son had found someone who gave him what no doctor, no expensive toy, private tutor ever had: a sense of belonging. The father knew then that this connection wasn't something small. It was important. It mattered. And it was only the beginning of something that would change all of their lives forever. The billionaire had grown used to people trying to get close to him for the wrong reasons. In his world, it was almost a rule that everyone wanted something: money, influence, power, or even just the status of being connected to him. That was why he had become careful, even suspicious, of every new face that came into his life. But the waitress was different, or at least she seemed to be. She had shown nothing but honesty, kindness, and genuine care. Yet, a part of him wondered if it could really be true. Could someone like her exist without wanting anything in return? He decided to test her. It wasn't out of cruelty, but out of habit. His wealth had made him cautious, and he wanted to be certain that her kindness toward his son, and even toward him, was real. So one day he asked one of his business associates to visit the diner in disguise. The man was instructed to offer her money, a large sum, in exchange for dropping out of her classes. The billionaire wanted to see if she would give up her dreams for a shortcut. When the associate sat at her table and made the offer, she looked surprised, then confused. She asked him why he would make such an offer. The man gave her a false story about wanting to support her so she could rest instead of studying so hard. She smiled politely, but her answer was firm. She told him that her education was not just about herself. It was for her siblings too. She said money could help for a moment, but knowledge would help for a lifetime. Then she thanked him, but refused the money. The associate reported everything back to the billionaire, and he felt both relieved and ashamed. Relieved that her heart was pure, ashamed that he had doubted her. She had stayed true to her principles, even when the temptation of easy money was placed right in front of her. Another time, Hay happened to overhear something at the diner that confirmed his trust. A wealthy man, clearly drunk, had made an inappropriate comment to her and tried to hand her a large tip. She refused, standing tall and saying she didn't need money from someone who disrespected her. She walked away without a second glance, even though she probably could have used the cash. The billionaire, sitting quietly in his booth, felt a surge of admiration. She valued her dignity more than anything money could buy. Meanwhile, his son was thriving like never before. The boy's therapy sessions became easier because he was motivated. He wanted to be stronger so that he could show the waitress his progress. He wanted to surprise her with his little victories, like lifting his arms higher or sitting without support for a longer time. He would ask his father to take photos of his improvements so he could share them with her. His laughter filled their home. His eyes sparkled with a hope that hadn't been there before. The father noticed these changes and realized how deeply the waitress's presence had affected his son's life. It wasn't just about pancakes or jokes. It was about being seen, being valued, and being encouraged. She had given his son something doctors, teachers, and even he himself had failed to give: the belief that he was capable of happiness and growth. The billionaire began to visit the soon. Sometimes he would sit quietly, observing her, watching how she treated people. She would greet the elderly regulars with familiarity, remembering their stories. She would kneel down to listen to children's tales about their toys or school projects. She would comfort tired workers with an extra refill of coffee and a kind word. No matter how rushed or busy the place became, she never lost her smile. Her character shone through in the smallest details. One afternoon, he saw her give part of her own meal to a homeless man who had wandered in, even though the diner's manager frowned at the man's presence. Another time, she covered for a fellow waitress who was sick. Working almost 20 hours straight without a single complaint, the billionaire knew then that this wasn't an act. This was who she truly was. Someone whose kindness was rooted deep in her soul. And the more he saw it, the more he felt drawn to her. Not as a billionaire who could give her money, but as a man who respected her strength at night. When he thought about his son's future, he felt less afraid. He realized that life wasn't only about wealth or physical strength. It was about having people who cared. People who brought light into dark places. And this waitress had brought light not only into his son's life, but into his own as well. Still, couldn't stop the questions in his mind. Why would someone like her, who had every reason to be bitter, choose kindness instead? Why would she give her energy to everyone else when she had so many burdens herself? He wanted to understand her fully, to know what kept her going. One evening, after closing time, he stayed behind as the last customer. He watched her wipe down tables, stack chairs, and hum softly to herself. When she came to his table to clear his cup, he asked her, almost without thinking, "Don't you ever get tired of giving so much?" She paused, looked at him, and then smiled softly. "Of course I do. But I remember what it feels like when someone shows you kindness on your worst day. That's what keeps me going. Maybe I can be that person for someone else." Her answer stayed with him long after he left. He couldn't stop replaying her words in his mind. He had all the wealth anyone could dream of. Yet it was Hertha woman, with worn shoes and tired eyes, who seemed to hold the richest heart of all. The next morning, his son woke up asking when they would go to the diner again. The father smiled, promising soon. But this time, he knew it wasn't just about pancakes anymore. Something much bigger was happening. His son's life was changing, his own heart was changing. And all because of one woman who had chosen to be kind when she didn't have to be. He didn't know where it would all lead, but he felt certain of one thing. He had found someone rare. Someone who had passed every test of character without even knowing she was being tested. And for the first time in many years, he felt a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, his world was about to change forever. The day finally came when the billionaire decided he could not keep his secret anymore. For weeks he had visited the diner with his son, sometimes alone, sometimes together. Each time, he grew more certain that the waitress was not like anyone else he had ever met. He had seen her kindness, her strength, her sacrifices, and her honesty. He had tested her, observed her, and learned about her life. She had no idea who he truly was or how powerful he could be. She treated him like a simple man and treated his son like a normal boy. And that was what had won his heart completely. One evening, After another happy meal at the diner, he invited her to his home. At first she hesitated. She had never been to the house of a customer before, especially not someone she barely knew outside of the diner. But when she saw the boy looking at her with pleading eyes, she agreed. She thought it would only be for dinner, small chance to spend time with the child who had stolen a piece of her heart. When she arrived, she was stunned. The mansion stood tall and wide, with gates that opened silently as if by magic. Expensive cars lined the driveway, and the house itself looked like something from a magazine. She clutched her small bag nervously, wondering if she had made a mistake. She had imagined the father was wealthy, but this was beyond anything she could have guessed. The boy greeted her with joy, calling her name and asking her to sit with him in the garden. She followed him, still in awe of the place, but her heart focused only on him. They played simple games together, laughing under the evening sky, while the billionaire stood a few steps away, watching silently. For the first time, he saw his son running around in his wheelchair, not with sadness, but with joy. And he saw the woman who had given his boy that joy without asking for anything in return. Later, at dinner, the billionaire finally spoke the words he had been holding back. He told her the truth, who he was, what he owned, and the life he lived. She sat frozen, her fork resting on the plate, staring at him in disbelief. For a moment she thought it was a joke, but the seriousness in his eyes told her it wasn't. She couldn't believe that the man she had served coffee and pancakes to was one of the richest men in the country. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed, and apologized for treating him so casually all those times, but he stopped her immediately. He told her that it was exactly her casual kindness that had made her so special. He explained how he had been searching for someone genuine, someone who could see beyond money and status, someone who could be trusted with the most fragile piece of his heart, his son. He told her that she had given his boy more happiness than all the doctors, tutors, and luxury could provide. Tears filled her eyes as she listened. She shook her head, saying she had done nothing extraordinary, only what anyone with a heart would do. But he disagreed. In his world, true kindness without expectation was the rarest treasure, and she had given it freely. Then he made her an offer that left her speechless. He told her he wanted to support her education fully, so she would never again have to worry about money standing in her way. He promised to help her siblings too, giving them opportunities she had struggled to provide alone. But more than that, he wanted her to work with him at first, as someone who could help care for his son, but also as part of a new charitable foundation he was creating to help families in need. At first, she refused. The thought of accepting so much seemed impossible. She worried people would think she had taken advantage of him. She worried about leaving behind the life she had fought so hard to build. But he looked at her with sincerity and told her this was not charity. This was a reward for her strength, her honesty, and her heart. It was not about what she could take from him, but what they could build together for his son, for her siblings, and for many others who needed hope. Her hands shook as she covered her face. Overwhelmed by emotions, she had worked endless hours, carried burdens too heavy for her young shoulders, faced nights when she thought she might break. And now, in a single evening, her world had changed completely. She cried, not from sadness, but from the release of all the years of struggle finally lifting off her chest. The boy wheeled closer and took her hand. "Now you don't have to be tired anymore," he said softly. She laughed through her tears, hugging him tightly. Realizing how much this child had changed her life too, from that night on, everything shifted. She left the diner, though not without tears and goodbyes to the coworkers who had become like family. She enrolled in her classes full-time, no longer needing to work double shifts. Her siblings moved into a better home where they could focus on school without worrying about bills. And she began spending her days not just studying, but also helping with the Billionaire's new foundation. Together, they worked on programs to support children with disabilities, single parents, and struggling families. She brought compassion and understanding to the work, while he brought resources and influence. The combination was powerful, and soon their efforts began changing lives far beyond their own circle. Through it all, she never lost her humility. She reminded him often that money alone was not enough. Fit was the human touch. It's a genuine care that made the real difference. He listened, learning from her every day. She had shown him what his wealth could truly mean when guided by kindness. As for the boy, he blossomed more than anyone had expected. With her encouragement, he grew braver and happier. He tried new therapies, smiled through difficult moments, and looked forward to the future with hope. He had someone who saw him not as a patient or a burden, but as a child full of possibilities. One afternoon, months later, the billionaire stood in the garden, watching a scene that filled his heart with peace. His son was laughing, playing a board game on the grass with the waitress, who was no longer just a waitress. She was part of their family now, though no one had spoken the word out loud yet. He watched them together, her laughter mixing with his son's joy. And he realized that everything had changed because of a single afternoon in a diner. He thought about how icily he could have missed it. If he had stayed busy with work that day, if he had dismissed her as just another stranger, if she had walked past his son without stopping to help, none of this would have happened. But Fedor, maybe kindness itself, had stepped in. And now, not only his son's life, but his own heart had been transformed forever. The waitress had walked into their world, carrying nothing but compassion, and she had given them everything that truly mattered. In return, he had given her the support to live her dreams, but even then, he knew the real gift was hers to them. She had reminded him that wealth means nothing without love, that power means nothing without compassion, and that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can ripple out and change lives in ways no one could ever predict. And so the billionaire stood there quietly, smiling as the sun set behind his garden. His son's laughter echoed across the yard, and the woman who had once carried the boy in her arms now carried their entire lives into a future filled with hope. He knew he would never forget the lesson she had taught him in that little diner, that the greatest treasures are not found in banks or mansions, but in hearts that choose kindness.